Hello and welcome. This is Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College, and this is day one of the Web Development Technologies course. And so, as far as today's agenda, I'm just going to do a quick instructor introduction. Kind of went through this on the welcome video, but I just kind of want to do that again, add a couple things. Then we'll go ahead and go through the online course format, how to succeed in this course, which, these areas were also included in the welcome video, but just kind of go over that quickly again. And then we'll do a course introduction, do the syllabus review, discuss setting up your environment if you haven't yet, and then from there we'll go ahead and do a lecture on chapter 1. So a little bit about me. I have, 18 plus years as software developer. Maybe software developer, not necessarily the correct. I did a lot of web stuff. So, this course is about the web stuff. That's been a lot of the things I have done. It's mostly web development. I have done other things as well, but a lot, most of it has been web development. Also did 2 years of managing teams, and usually that was also web development teams. And as far as education, kind of wanted to mention here, you notice I don't have a computer science degree, so I was able to get a job without a computer science degree. Obviously, it was some years ago. Things were a little different maybe back then, but you don't necessarily have to have a computer science degree to get a job in technology, right? And as far as my certifications there, and I kind of do want to talk about this a little bit later on as well. But a lot of certifications, especially for this program, the Application Web Development Program, there's not really a de facto certification. Even though there are some that exist out there, they're not really widely accepted as, oh yeah, well if you've got this, then yeah, you know that. This all this material, and it's really not like that in software development because there's so many different areas. Okay, and a lot of my certifications are like the first one's a Java programmer. Obviously, that's a coding one. Then I have a project management PMP, which is project management professional certification. Then these other ones here, the AWS ones at AZ, these are all cloud based, right? So these are all cloud-based, and they're more specific to, a cloud vendor and certain certification from that vendor, right? And really, a lot of the reasons for that was when I worked at from certain consulting companies. They actually like to be able to state that, hey, we have 30 people with this certification, 30 with this. They use it as a marketing tool, the consulting company. But then also the clients also like, oh yeah, we like the fact that you have all these people that are certified as well. So it's kind of win-win there. But a lot of times it's that sometimes I didn't really use all the skill, a lot of the skills from those cloud certifications, but they do benefit me as well. So. Now, another thing I kind of really wanted to do in this course, the previous course was the C# course, which is still a first year course, and now this is the Web Technologies course, which is actually it's the first one in the list, but you can take either the Web Technologies course first or the C# course first. But one thing I do want to do in this course is kind of really start working on helping the students as far as career development type things, getting a resume. There's going to be a job fair that's going to be coming up in March down in St. Louis City. I recommend you try to attend that if possible. But I really want to kind of I was going to come up with a series of videos. This is, this isn't required, right? This is kind of optional type stuff. But I want to come up with a series of videos on multiple different topics such as, resume development, how to create an online presence and stuff like that, a professional one, and, multiple different things in that area, as well as, just how to evaluate a job listing and our different options, as far as getting some experience, maybe before you hit the job market, or maybe you can get something sooner before you even graduate, right? So I kind of wanted to really spend some time on that to help you guys out with career development type stuff. So let's go ahead and move on from that. As far as the online course format, so we're going to have these instructor live sessions like we're having today. Obviously, today we're going to go over quite a few just kind of housework type things. Just some areas that we kind of just need to discuss, introductory type stuff we need to discuss. But going forward, there'll be much more, book chapters and other concepts and so forth, right? So besides these sessions, usually these sessions, for the most part, this course started on a Wednesday this time around. But generally our lectures will be like Monday and Tuesday for the most part, and then the other days will be lab days. There might be some other times that we have some sessions on different days as well, but generally they're going to be like Monday and Tuesday, probably around 2.5 hours from like 9 to 11:30. Sometimes they might go a little longer than that. So that will be kind of the plan going forward here this semester. And like I said, you'll have plenty of lab days to do your assignments. And there's 2 course textbooks, and I'll let you know. I do have a question on that. I'm gonna, there's some challenges with the book stuff that I'd rather not get into. But so I'll let you know how that's going to go. But just go ahead and fill out what your preference on the questionnaire, and we'll go from there on that. One thing to mention also is for assignments. One thing, it's a little different than people who are already in the C# class. There, most of the time we just had lab. We had the written test, we had the labs, and we had the hands-on test. But there's also homework assignments, pretty much every chapter as well. And really, we really just need to treat them just like labs. It was really set up more for the in-person classes where there's some homework that they kind of did throughout the week that maybe you have this done by tomorrow and stuff like that. But most of our assignments we try to have them due by Sunday at midnight. So basically, for the most part, the labs and the homework will be due on Sunday by midnight. A lot of the hands-on test will be due pretty much in the middle of the week, and the written test will also be due Sunday by midnight. But I just kind of want to mention that we have a little different from the C# class where we didn't have the homework assignments. But we do have homework assignments in this course. And just please, as far as if you need any additional assistance with anything, please let me know. We do have a designated tutor, and I'll send you information on that in an upcoming email. So don't be afraid to ask for any help if you need help. So I do want to kind of go through, kind of how to succeed in this course, and I know I mentioned this before, but this is a 14 credit hour course, and and a significant commitment of your time is necessary to do well. It says the spring semester of this course is 16 weeks. To succeed in this course, is a good rule of thumb to dedicate around 20 plus hours per week. Right? Some students will need more time. Others will get their work done in less time than that. But really the biggest thing is you got to really be, for these online courses. It's really important to be self motivated. Have a schedule and really allocate your time. It's not good for procrastinators. If you're a procrastinator, you need to work extra hard to make sure that you're getting some work done and not trying to put it all off until Sunday evening to get started on that. That's kind of a recipe for disaster, to be honest with you. And just make sure you create a plan and schedule and stick with it. And don't wait till the last day of the week to start your assignments. Try to go through those book chapters. A lot of the written tests are based really just off those book chapters. You don't be afraid to ask for help, and also don't give up. It's really a lot of this course is actually perseverance and not giving up and keeping at it. And as long as you keep at it, you're going to do well in this course. It's usually people who struggle you know don't allocate the enough time to the course. Okay. So let's see. Next, I wanted to kind of go through course description a little bit. So this is a web-based course. Includes the technologies needed to develop modern websites. Students will get hands-on experience in the latest HTML, which is hypertext markup language, CSS, which is cascading style sheets, and JavaScript technologies. We'll obviously be going into each one of these areas. This course will introduce and cover current content management systems, accessibility concepts, web ethics, e-commerce, website search optimization. We won't really do very much in that, but we'll discuss it a little bit. And, we'll talk about mobile website technology, which basically a lot of it nowadays is the responsive web that can be used in a browser or in a web, and we'll discuss that as well. The focus is to build students' abilities and confidence through hands-on exercises and real-world projects. We'll have some multiple projects to do here. We'll have a couple good ones that you can put on a web portfolio. And another thing that we will be doing within this course is creating a web portfolio that you can have deployed on the internet, and you can share that. And we're going to discuss that a lot here in the upcoming weeks. And this is, like I said, 14 credit hour course, so you need to make sure you allocate your time as needed. Course level outcomes. So for this course, the course level outcomes is write standard compliant HTML5 and CSS to structure and style a web page. HTML is about structure, CSS is about style. Okay, and we'll be going into that more. We're going to use CSS to position elements on a web paging using responsive web design techniques, including Bootstrap. Bootstrap's a framework, okay, a separate framework. Create websites that include images, lists, tables, video, audio, icons, and animations. Develop web forms that use JavaScript to respond to events. Solve problems using fundamental programming concepts, including variables, branching, and loops. And this is to do with JavaScript here, okay? And then we're going to manipulate the DOM, and the DOM is the document object model. And basically, the HTML document is the document object model, okay? In this case, right? So we're going to be manipulating that DOM using JavaScript and jQuery, okay? jQuery is another external framework, a third-party framework. I should say external third-party framework. Now, jQuery is not as for people doing new projects. jQuery's not used that much on new projects, but there's a lot of websites that have been built with jQuery, and a lot of companies still have it. And a lot of times for maintenance and stuff like that. And, some teams that if they know jQuery and they need to do something new at a company, they might just use jQuery because they already know it and they already have staff with expertise. jQuery is kind of a little bit, some of the later, we're going to discuss this in the future here, but some of the later features in JavaScript made jQuery not as relevant. We'll discuss that. And we haven't, this last course, I actually didn't spend a lot of time on jQuery, but there is a newer version of jQuery that has come out. And like I said, it is very prevalent, so we're going to spend a little time on that. Okay, so from there, just kind of want to go over this main page here a little bit for just point out some things, and I'll mention this a couple times here. So the maximum allowable absences for this course is 2. And attendance is taken once a week, and it's based on submitting assignments. So as long as you're submitting assignments, you will be marked as present. If by Sunday at midnight, if you have not submitted any assignment at all, okay, and there's basically, for the most part, 2 ways to submit assignment. The one is doing a written test, and one is doing one of the lab or homework assignments. And those we save, that's coding ones, and we save those to GitHub, right? So either a written test or assignment there, right? And not every week we'll have a written test. There might be some weeks we don't have a written test, so you may have to make sure you do a different kind of assignment, right? What else I want to mention here? I do have this phone number, but this really just kind of goes to voicemail, and it's not really that helpful for me. It's not really a real phone, so it just goes to voicemail. Sometimes I miss these, so really the best way to get a hold of me is either email me or using or via a message on Discord, the other way. As far as this is an online remote course, office hours, I just have from 7 to 8 and 1 to 3. I'll probably change this to 7 to 9 since we're starting our classes at 9. But also, I will be available other times. But, these are my general hours, from like 7 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. I do check here and there. So I'll be available to help you out at different times. But I can't really guarantee I'm going to always be available 24/7 and things. And we'll talk about that more here in the future. So overall grade breakdown. So this is important. I want to show you something here as far as weight breakdown so you can understand something. So as we hear, let's just pull this aside for a second. So as you can see, we've got a final project 10%, hands-on test 40%, homework and labs are 15% each. So together they're say 30%, and then you have written tests that are 20%. Okay. Now I do want to mention something just to make sure everybody understands about how grades are weighted. So here's your weight. These are the same as what I just showed you on that page, on the main page. So this isn't probably exact, but this is about how many points each of these areas, each of these assignments will end up being throughout the course. So labs will be about 2,000 points. Homework will be 1,700 points, etc. Right? Through here, tests are a lot less. Final projects, a lot less. Okay? And I just wanted to kind of make sure that people understand, because sometimes you sit there and look at, well, if I'm behind or what's the most important thing? Well, this thing's worth 100 points and this thing's worth 25 points. So, I better do good on the 100-point thing, but that's not really how it works with weighted grades. Okay. So here's an example. Let's just say it's a 90%, right? It's kind of a B, right? A B. And so 90%. And here's the total points, and I just made this up, okay? And I made this 90% of these, okay? So I want to go ahead and make a change here just to show you how this can really change things. So hands-on tests are the most important. They're 40% of your grade. So instead of 900, let's say instead of these 810 points, you only got 450, okay? If you get 450, that bumped that because it's 40% of your grade, okay? It really doesn't matter how many points this is. It's basically, it's this 50%. So what it's going to do is going to take 40% of your 50%, right? 10% of your 90%. So 40%, 40% of your 50% is 20. And you can see your 90 that you had, you look how you could do great on all these other areas. And if you really botched your hands-on test, right? You're at 74. 74 is actually a D. It's not passing for this course. You have to have a C or better for this course, right? 74.5, I believe. So you have to have a 74.5 to pass this course. So just by that change, that's the case. And, I just kind of even want to show this a little bit. So let's make this, and I just want to show you same thing, right? Because once again, points really does not matter. Okay, it does within a category. I would say within each of these, an assignment that's 60 points is going to be more important than an assignment that would be 30 points. If we broke that down, let's just say there's 2 hands-on tests, right? Obviously, we have a lot more points than that, but points really don't matter. It's really your percent of your grades here. Okay. I hope that makes sense. So, just keep that in mind. The hands-on tests are most important. And then from there, so then, also written tests. Written tests, people struggle with them a little more. We really need to, I'm going to see what I can do to help you guys, kind of do a little better on the written test. Because it's kind of the same thing here. You can really change your grade dramatically. Let's say you just got 50% on this. And if you got 50%, you took your 90 down to 82, right? But like I said, hands-on tests are the most important. And then from there, probably a combination of homework and labs. But you spend a lot more time on these. You spend a lot more time in these, even though they're not worth as much. All right. Together, that's 30%. Okay. I hope that helps you understand that a little better. Let me see if there's anything. Okay. So do want to kind of go ahead and go through this. I already mentioned this is the syllabus. So the course schedule is going to change frequently throughout the semester. Just to keep that in mind. And also, I'll probably put a note here also, as far as because down below here where I have the schedule. I have dates and stuff like that, and so really inside ranking's going to be the de facto official, when something is due. You really need to follow what's inside ranking. I wouldn't follow exactly what's in the syllabus because some things might change. Really, the important thing is what's in the inside ranking, what's due, and follow the dates on that. Okay. Let's see here. So as far as policies, make sure you look at the Rankin Technical College Student Handbook. Attendance, I just want to mention again, is if you're absent more than 2 times, which is basically 2 weeks, the registrar office will automatically drop you from the course. Okay. You can appeal this after that happens, but just want to point that out. The registrar office will remove you immediately from the class once you get that 3rd absence. Okay, and usually a lot of times when someone has 2 absences, usually their grade's suffering pretty much because we have continuous assignments every week, and you get 2 weeks behind, your grade's usually going to be suffering. So yeah, and I do want to mention as far as the schedule for this class. So this compared to in-person class. So if there's a holiday, so we have holidays this semester. We have Martin Luther King Day. We have President's Day. I think like Good Friday is also one. Those dates, for if you're in an in-person class, you know, you're not going to be going to class that day, right? It's an all school holidays. Well, one thing that's kind of a little different about the online class, it don't really actually count all of those holidays. It's pretty much an online course. So, I take into, if it's a holiday, I'm not going to have a lecture that day. Okay, I won't have a lecture that day, but most of the classes are like 80 days, right? And so for 80 days, it doesn't count those things. So actually, your class, when you start your class the same times as a in-person class, we're going to be done with our class before then because the holidays aren't going to count. Okay, just something to keep in mind. So one of the important things is academic honesty. You can read through that. Just make sure no cheating on homework assignments, helping others cheat. Okay, as far as late work and retakes, written tests cannot be submitted late. Okay, so they are generally due by Sunday at midnight. And once that closes on Inside Rankin, that's closed and it's not going to be opened up again. All right, so for written tests, you need to make sure you get that done before midnight on Sunday. I would try to get it done way before Sunday so you don't get in a situation where you don't get that submitted. Okay. And so all the other assignments being hands-on test, labs, and homework assignments can all be retaken, but you're going to have a 10% penalty. So we just basically take 10% off the top, and then I'll grade it from there. Right. And now, I know that, it's easy to say, oh, well, I can just turn things in late. Obviously, you can. But once again, usually when that starts happening repeatedly, when a student usually starts getting into that a little bit too much, they start falling far behind, and it becomes a problem. So you'd be surprised. Actually, not that many people do make up on late assignments. Usually, when people are late, they end up not doing it, or they don't, put in the time. They just throw something together. So keep that in mind. Just really try to get your assignments completed the week they're due. And then also, so are a lot of our assignments are on GitHub. So basically, if it's not there, if you don't see it on GitHub, it's not there. So that's your responsibility. Make sure it's out there on GitHub by the due date. Make a habit of committing your work multiple times a week. That way, something happens and you get involved, or some minor little thing happens, emergency in your life, and all of a sudden it's Sunday and you haven't turned anything in. So if you kind of commit your work throughout the week, you won't have to worry about that. Okay, we already kind of went through this course weighting. And then obviously here, so 74.5 is a C. Anything below that does not satisfy the course requirements. Okay. So here's the workload table. So for lectures, so basically this is one of the lecture classes. So basically we're talking about 80 hours. 80 hours is going to be about, 2.5 per week. 5 per week, sorry. About 5 per week, okay? And some of these, besides just these theory classes, I'll also create some other videos for some other specific reasons. It kind of depends on where we need something explained a little more, or some other areas that I kind of want to cover. So as far as out of class preparation, it's given you about 40 hours for reading. So, that's basically 2.5 hours a week for reading, 80 hours for homework and written test hours, and then 120 for project hours, which is lab hours. All right. So this comes out to 320 hours. And if you divide that by 16, that's going to be 20 hours a week. So that's kind of where we come up with that 20-hour number for how much you really should spend. Okay. So there are a few new students in this course. Most of the students that are in this course this semester are returning students. They already took C# last semester, but there are a few new students. So if you have any problems with inside ranking, please reach out to me and I'll work with you through that. As far as tutor, we do have a designated tutor. I'll go ahead and send you the information on that. Also, if you have any other questions, you can always contact Patrick Glenn, admissions counselor, and he's at the Wentzville office. And also, if you have any special needs or any special needs or disability, you need some specific accommodations. Also, please contact Patrick Glenn on that as well. Now, there is a career services department. It's available to help students resume writing and job placement. I encourage you to look into that a little bit. And like I said, I'm also wanting to devote, this semester, I want to devote some time in that area as well for you guys. Then if you have any questions about any of that, please visit the Rankin Technical College Student Handbook. So let's go ahead and go through this course schedule a little bit. So this course schedule will change frequently throughout the semester, as I stated. So actually, when I did, I haven't gotten this completed. I'm about halfway through. So if you want to kind of look ahead at some of this, okay, you can look at some of the assignments that'll be due in the future. The hands-on test, they will only be viewable during the window of when they're due. Usually I'm going to make them available Monday morning, and usually they'll be due like Wednesday. Just kind of depends on some other factors as well, especially if there's a holiday and stuff like that. They may be due. I would say if they're going to be due Wednesday or Thursday. Okay. So basically, this is a lot of the things that I've already gave you links to on the email. Setting up your environment. One thing I did want to mention, we'll go ahead and look at setting up your environment a little bit. And one thing I did want to mention, especially to the students that were in the C# course this last semester, we're using Visual Studio Code, which is a different editor, the Visual Studio Community 2022, right? So it's a different editor. It's meant more for the web technologies, the HTML, CSS, etc. So it's a different editor. So the most important things on setting up your environment for the students who are returning that already took C# and have their stuff set up is that, and also you need to create a repository using the classroom, right? There's a new repository just for this course. It's different from the one that you were using. Okay, them are probably the two things from the C#. For the new students, if you need any help with environment setup, usually there's a couple people every semester that are always or more that ask for help in setting up your environment. So don't be afraid to reach out to me on setting up your environment. So this is day one. And I've got these videos listed, instructions for the environment, and reading chapter 1. And we will go over lecture for chapter 1 here today as well. Obviously I'm not going to go through each of these, but, here you see you've got a lecture day, lecture on chapter 1, lecture on chapter 2. And then we have some lab days. This week, it's a shortened week, so we just have one lab day, which is Friday, this Friday. Generally, if this would have been a full week, I would have added chapter 3 here as well. Chapter 1, there really isn't much there. I'm going to go through a lecture. The only thing we're going to do is the chapter 1 written test. If we have enough time today, I will go through that chapter 1 written test. If not, we will do it at the beginning of tomorrow. I think, I'm a lot farther ahead than I already thought I would be at this point. So we'll probably end up trying to get this done today. And we can do this as a class. And then obviously in the recorded video, for anybody who can't attend the class, they can go ahead. So we'll do this as a class for you. And that will help, kind of like to get off to a good start. If you did the questionnaire, that's 20 points. You got an A right away, 100% A. If you did the questionnaire, and then, we do the written test. Hopefully as a class, we'll get an A on that. We get 100% on that as well. And so, get you off to a good start on your grade. Okay. And then here's basically telling you to watch these YouTube videos. Basically, this is the day 1. This is going to be the day 2 video that I'll put in the playlist after the conclusion of the lectures. So I'm not going to go through all of these, obviously. But, we're going to go through, we don't go through all of the HTML. The first one, these are all the HTML stuff. HTML, cascading style sheet stuff, right? We won't go through every chapter. We're going to go in here. Bear with me. So we come up here about week 4. We're starting on. We're going to lecture on Bootstrap. Okay, we're going to start working on Bootstrap. And here's some resources on that. Like I said, here you go with if you wanted to, if for students who've kind of cruising along, if you kind of have an opportunity to get ahead on things, you can always work on some of these assignments. I would do them. I wouldn't just cherry pick them. I'd kind of do them in order. Would be probably the best way. I wouldn't just grab something, halfway through. I'd kind of make sure you do it in order. And then obviously you see where there's a hands-on test due. Like I said, make sure that, really use as your, the official, officially I would use inside ranking to make sure, that that's the date when something's really due. This could change or it could be out of sync. It's kind of redundant in a way, especially I send emails, so it's kind of redundant. I send the emails just to kind of isolate just the things that are due that week, right? So, but here we go, lecture. So chapter 12, chapter 13 is forms. We're going to be getting pretty soon here. We're going to be, so if you see about week 6, we're going to be starting on JavaScript. I think that this schedule might be a little too aggressive, and and like I said, that's why, I said make sure you use inside ranking. I'm probably going to move some of this stuff, spread some of this stuff out here towards the end here. Maybe the Bootstrap on, I'll probably push some things that'll extend a little farther out here. Okay. But about week 6 through, week 6, week 7, somewhere in that area, we'll probably be starting JavaScript. And there's a separate book for that as well. Okay. So, here's an example on 2/17. Here's a holiday, so there won't be a lecture that day. Probably what we'll end up doing, let's see, did I make it both days? Yeah. So instead of that week, instead of Monday and Tuesday, it'll be Tuesday and Wednesday. So that's how that will usually work for us. So here's week 8, day 34. So, and then here, we're going to do a midterm. A few things are going to be happening this week. So this week, like 3/5, so this is March the 5th, there's an IT division job fair, and this is down in St. Louis City. I recommend, if you can, try to attend that. We'll discuss that a little bit more in the future. What that's about. It's nothing to be nervous about or anything like that. Because I could understand if I was a younger a younger guy here, and I was, I'd probably have a little bit of anxiety about having to go to that, and it's really nothing to be concerned about, and we'll discuss that more. But it's an opportunity. They'll have a bunch of booths there. Some different companies will be there. It's not like people are going to ask you a bunch of questions that you need to answer, technology questions or anything. So it's just a job fair. You'll see some different booths, and just an opportunity to see some of the companies. And the good thing about this is the companies at this job fair are companies that hire ranking grads. Okay, so that's a important thing there, right? And also, before here, I'll make sure we schedule some time for getting a resume together, just so you have a resume by the time you go there. So I'll make sure I schedule some time with you on that. As far as the midterm, I'd like to. We have done. Last semester, during the summer semester when I taught this course, we actually it was also offered downtown and downtown live course, in-person class at the same time. And so, the other instructor and myself, he actually had an opportunity where he had somebody who wanted to get a website built. It was a non-profit organization, but things kind of didn't work out where, as far as coordinating with that person. So that's what I did for the midterm last in the summer. But this time, I think we're going to do something a little different. And what I kind of really want to do here is, we're going to be discussing how the HTML, CSS, JavaScript stuff, and a lot of the stuff we're going to be doing is client side. We're going to be building things that you basically build it on your computer and you can run it on your computer. It's not going to be necessarily going and making calls outside, right? But I do want to expose some of that to you, and so what I'm kind of wanting to do is maybe been already kind of looking at that is providing some data that you can actually, and I'll kind of have it pretty coded for you, so you won't have to worry about that. But it'll bring back a whole bunch of data to the screen, or not to the screen, the data to your app, to your web app that you're going to build, and then you can just format that data that comes back from that call. It'll be called an API call, application programming interface, and it'll be a call that you make, and it'll bring back data, and you would parse that data, and that's kind of good because that's really what we do in the real world. Especially for web apps, usually you're bringing back data, you're parsing through data, and you're displaying that specific data. Not as opposed to really a static site where you just information purposes. Okay, and we're going to go through all that here, so no worries on that. But this is like day 40. This is like halfway through the course. And like I said, we'll have a midterm that week, and also during that week will also be the job fair. So kind of devote our time to that. And then from that, that's about where I'm at with our schedule. So I need to work on that. Let's see. I don't know if there's anything else that I really wanted to go through on that. I do think I need to go through the work ethic stuff. I'm going to bring this over here for a minute, so I don't accidentally share something I'm not supposed to. Okay, sorry about that. I don't know why that does that to me on my desktop. All right. So here's your work ethic grade. You come in here. Let's see. I made it as a student view here. So one thing you kind of want to point out here about the work ethic grade, some things have kind of changed a little bit on how we're handling things with that, and probably the biggest change is basically if you're absent, you're gonna get you're gonna get points deducted for being absent. So every time you're absent, you're gonna be deducting points. Um, Usually, I haven't always done that. Sometimes, if someone's excessively, absent, once I get to 2 or 3 at the end, um, I end up deducting points. But basically, I have to deduct a certain amount of points each time. So for especially this online course, things are a little different than in person. You don't have to worry about wearing, your uniform, your appearance, all that's important for in-person classes. That's not the case for the online. Probably the biggest and most, the most important things for the work ethic grades is turning in your work. Basically turning in your work. Being diligent about turning in your work. Make sure you're not absent. Uh, Academic honesty, right? Getting along with others. Just make sure show respect to fellow students, your instructors, and any other people that you associate with or engage with at Rankin. So them are probably the biggest things. Having a good attitude, getting along with others, doing your work really. So then obviously, if there's a problem, usually we don't have problems with this on online courses, but just kind of want to point that out. And I don't know if there's much else to really discuss on that. You can't even be tardy in an online course. But you will have a separate grade, right? I gotta see what happens when I click that here. Yeah. Oh, then yeah, I just also wanted to mention as far as that's concerned. So as far as your grade, it's going to start out at 86%. So which just meets expectations, and then from there you could go to needs improvement if you get enough things that were marked against you, or also there's opportunities. You do extra work. One student, Ashton, actually he helped me with the Shadow Attack Day, helped me with Shadow Attack Day at Wentzville. So kind of extra points for stuff like that. You get extra points for things, but if you kind of there's very few things you can actually get extra points for. But if you go out, beyond, helping out, beyond just your normal duties. So, all right, that's that. Let's see what else we have here today. We want to start this. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break and just come back around a little. Come back at 10. Let's just make it a 15-minute break. Come back. Come back at 10:05, and then we'll go ahead and start chapter 1 here.
Hey, can I talk?
There's new websites are created every hour, 10,500. So it's kind of interesting that this is something these technologies we're using, the HTML, CSS, JavaScript. They've been around pretty much from the beginning of the internet, and they're still very prevalent. And this is what people basically are using to create these websites. So it's a set of technologies that definitely test of time, right? Survive the test of time there, right? So I guess the whole idea about the most of these sites are inactive because people build sites and they never really market them, or don't do anything with them. Only the ones that are really serious about it survive. So okay. So introduction to web development. We're going to describe the components of a web application, distinguish between internet and intranet, describe HTTP requests and responses, distinguish between the way a web server processes static web pages and dynamic web pages, describe the use of JavaScript, distinguish between HTML and CSS, explain how you deploy a website on the internet, describe the components of an HTTP URL, and we're going to discuss the 4 web development issues. That's responsive web design, cross-browser compatibility, web accessibility, and search engine optimization. So here's the basic components of a web application. You basically have a client, which is either a desktop computer, tablet, smartphone, etc. Right? Could be others as well, right? But these are what we're most familiar with. And then basically through the internet, you access a web server, right? So the web page and everything else lives on a web server, and using the URL, you go through the internet to the web server, and the web server returns the web page. Okay. As far as a network is concerned, and this is actually an area that I think for your career and be a good idea at some point if you spend a little time just learning. There's different little simple courses or tutorials on just basic networking. I think it's a good idea to understand if you don't already have a little bit of a idea about networking. I think I think it'd be very advantageous for you to spend a little time learning about networking. So here we're talking about a LAN, which is local area network, and a wide area network. And a local area network refers to a network that covers a small geographic area. Typically within a single building or campus. Just say like maybe a school campus, or you may have a medical building or something, right? A hospital, something like that, just covering that area, and all the computers that are connected together could form a local area network. Okay. Obviously, they'd have to be connected together in some way, right? But they could be connected together to be a local area network. It is often used for connecting devices such as computers, printers, and servers within a specific location, like an office, home, or school. Okay. Now, your home network can be considered a local area network, but from my perspective, I kind of look at it a little different. I look at it as from perspective, usually you've got like just say a company that has a big office, and the whole building's the same company, right? And maybe they share printers, and they share other things as well. And so all the computers are like connected together. Usually, not that it couldn't be done with Wi-Fi, but usually we're talking about cables here, cables connecting computers together, right? And that would form a local area network. Now, a wide area network is a network that spans a large geographic area, and it's connecting multiple LANs together, right? So your LAN may be connecting all these computers together, right? But that is only within that specific area. A wide area network actually is your LAN could be connecting to a WAN, a wider area network, right? And to get access to the internet, you're going to have to get access via a wide area network, right? So the network that spans large geographic area, connecting multiple LANs and other networks together across cities, countries, and even continents. WANs, wide area networks, are often used by organizations with multiple locations to interconnect their LANs and provide access to centralized resource services. So from our perspective, we're kind of used to using our home networks and stuff like that. But there there's cable. You can get designated cable, and a long time ago, especially people who work from home, and I'm sure people still do. You can get, nowadays you've got fiber and different options, but a long time ago, things were a lot slower, right? The options, you could get a designated cable though, and it would cost you a lot more money, over a designated wire. And a lot of big companies do that, and they actually rent those from a different companies so they can connect a maybe an office building in New York with an office building in Los Angeles, and it's high speed just between them. Doesn't necessarily go over the internet, right? It don't necessarily have to go over the internet because they're actually renting those cables, running that from a company that provides that service, right? So it's possible for that to happen even without being on the internet. Them are just designated type cables. Okay, don't get too hung up on that. So here's the architecture of the internet. So you have all these different local area networks connecting to a wide area networks, right? So on the outside here, you got all your local area networks, and on the inner part, you've got your wide area networks. Okay. So here's an example of an intranet. Okay. And what an intranet is kind of like, pretty much like we're talking about with the local area network, right? You can have a web server. Like here, they've got an example of a file server here. So let's say you have, let's say you've got, like I said, let's say you got this company, right? And you've got file servers. You can have this all connected so that people can access, save data, do all these things on this file server without actually going over the internet, right? This all happens more at a local pace, right? As opposed to, so here you see like you got this firewall to protect you from from the internet here, right? So that people can't come in here and take stuff on your network, right? It's called a firewall, right? It's a VPN firewall. So this is what's intranet, right? That's where you usually have, an internal network separated by this VPN, right? So that it protects you isolates you from the internet itself, right? Not that you can't have access to the internet, but you have to go through the VPN, okay? So here is an example. Here's an example of a static web page, okay? And I'm going to actually bring this page up. This is something the publisher has, and I just used to use a different one. Let me bring that up here. Where is that? Okay, right here. So here's the Newton Fork Ranch, and this is considered a static website, right? What makes this a static website is that basically, if you bring this page up, you're going to see the same thing I see, right? There's nothing different. There's There's no dynamic content based on a user login or, something like that, right? Where what I'm seeing is different than what you're seeing. Basically, you could continue, no matter who brings this up, everybody's going to be seeing the same thing, right? The only way this would ever change is somebody would, whoever maintains this website would go and update the page. They could update, add a link, change the text, right? Once they change that, it's changed. So there is that part where they're changing something, but once it's changed, that's it. And then everybody's still going to see the same thing. It's basically, it's considered a static website. It has multiple pages. As you can see the URL based on what you go to. Here's the index. And a lot of sites, basically the main page of a lot of pages is called index.html, okay? That don't have to be like that. That was usually more traditional. Nowadays you can kind of change that on the web server, but we don't have to get into too much of that. But this is just a static site with different web pages. Okay, like I said, it's static. It's going to, whatever I see, you're going to see the same thing. All right. Now here is how a web server processes a static page, right? So the client, which is the web browser, which that's what I have, and I made an HTTP request. And that's basically the URL, knowing the URL, right? The URL starts with HTTP. By knowing the URL, it knows, there's a lot of things that happen in the process, and it's actually very quick, but, it actually uses that name of that, and it goes to something called, I can just mention this, you don't need to know it for test or anything, but called DNS is a domain name server. Based on that name, it has a specific IP address that's tied to that web server, right? That's how it knows that this name, right? The name of your page, the name that you're going to, is tied to a specific place, right? A web server is by using a domain name server that translates the name to an IP address. Okay. So it makes an HTTP request. And this HTML file could be just living on this web server, or sometimes they have what's called file servers that it could be living on that. So basically it's just taking this file, this is not dynamically created, like this is just created based on what that, like I said, it could be updated, but that's it, right? It doesn't change dynamically for different users or that. Once it's changed, it's pretty much static till it gets changed again. So it comes back, so the web server returns this as the HTTP response, okay? And this is HTML, okay? It's an HTTP response, and part of that HTTP response is the HTML page, okay? So HTTP is a protocol. Okay, and a protocol refers to a set of rules or conventions that govern the communication between different entities over a network. These rules define the format, sequence, and error handling procedures for exchanging data and messages between devices or systems. One of the most fundamental protocols used in web programming is the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP. Is a protocol that enables the transfer of hypertext documents. And a hypertext document, a web page is a hypertext document, right? Such as web pages over the internet. It specifies how clients, such as web browsers, request resources from servers and how servers respond to those requests. So this protocol, this is defined, it has certain specifications. So if you come up with your own idea of a different web browser to compete with Chrome and Safari and all the other ones, Edge, you're gonna have to build that thing so it supports the HTTP protocol, so that you can display pages, right? So you can do the same thing as the other browsers do. Okay. Let me go show you something on that. So here, right here, this is actually the HTTP protocol. This is the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. These are all the different requirements, specifications, so forth. It's very lengthy, right? So anybody who's creating a web server software, and we'll talk about the difference between a web server software and hardware in a minute. But if you're creating a web server software or you're creating a browser, many other things as well, you need to you have to be able to implement the HTTP request response. You have to follow all of these specifications. Okay. Do want to kind of go down here. It's very extensive, obviously. And one thing you will learn a little bit here is there's different methods. There's a get, that's when you get data. And there's also other ones as well. For an average user, they're just worried about this. When you start getting into programming, right? When we start programming things, we could do post, we could do puts, we can do deletes. There's other options as well, right? But usually for a user, it might, in cases where there's a form, from a user's perspective, if there's a form, he fills out the form, hits submit, and it gets submitted over the internet, that's actually a post, right? That's actually a post. The user don't know that, but behind the scenes, that's a post, right? But for the most part, when you're getting information back and forth over the internet, that's a get, right? And these things are relevant for developers, and we will be not so much in this class. We'll learn a little bit about it, but basically in the year 2, the database driven 1 course, that's when you'll be learning a lot more on those. Okay. One thing I did want to kind of just show you as an example. So there's status codes. So when you make a request for a page and it comes back, if it comes back, it's good. That's a good request. You're going to have a 200 error, not 200 error, a 200 status code, all right? But there's other ones as well, and you don't have, you're not going to be tested on this, but just kind of pointed out. So another one that's kind of popular here, a 404. For some reason you went to somewhere, something got changed, and there's an old link, and you click the link, and you get a 404, right? Let me show you. So here, let's just do this. So here we've got events, and if we go ahead and change this to a 2, right? So this don't really exist. I'm making this up. I put whatever, right? And then I hit enter. So what's going to happen here? You're going to get a 404 error. So that's what happens is since the web server and the browser both understand that what a 404 error is, right? So what happens is a request went to the web server. The web server said, "Hey, I don't have this page. I don't know what this is." It returns a 404 error. Okay. Now there's different ways you can, for this web server, this is how they have this configured. You could have a much better looking page. Some people have ones that look worse than this, aren't very user friendly, but at least this tells you, hey, this page was not found. Okay. And it tells you, it's telling you a 404 error. A lot of times, most user wouldn't even know what a 404 error was. And this isn't really user friendly, to be honest with you, because like all this, they don't know what this all means, right? Basically not found. To make this really user friendly, probably the best way to do this would be the requested URL was not found on the server. Please enter a valid URL or something like that, because this most users ain't gonna know what this means, right? So. But this is a little small site, right? This isn't, I wouldn't say a professional site or, like something that's maybe, they're worrying about kind of the look and feel that much, okay? So, but like I said, this is the protocol. And, all the stuff has to be addressed in the software for a browser and for the web server so that they can communicate using HTTP and they can display the correct status codes and so forth. Okay. So that's that. That's a static page. And then here's a dynamic page. So one thing here I wanted to talk about a little bit before this. So a dynamic. So I think the book kind of really just talks about there's static and there's dynamic, and that's it. I kind of look at it a little differently, and tell me what you think. So I look at, obviously, here, let's go back. This is what I look at as being a static web page, right? This is, like I said, I bring this up, you bring this up, we're going to see the same thing. There's not a login, there's no dynamic content being created, right? It's a little different. And usually I look at a website being more for like informational purposes too, right? This is just information and stuff. Not that you can't. I think you can contact us. They do have a links, I think, for you to cabins and rates. I think you can actually do reservations and stuff. But that's actually just a call to an external website. Okay, it's not done within this website, right? But basically this is all static here. So, but let's look at, so this is what I consider a static website, and this is an informational website. And I also consider like ESPN, okay, being also an informational website, right? It's all about information, stories, news. I always look at news stuff really being informational type, right? And so, is this static? Well, basically this thing here, this thing's going to stay the same unless somebody updates this story, right? And then but like I said, just kind of like that static website we were looking at prior to this one would be the same thing. They would have to update the story. Once it's updated, what I see would be the same thing you see, right? A lot of what we're going to be seeing here is the same thing I'm going to be seeing here, right? However, I consider this dynamic for a different reason, and that's because I look at this, I have a login, and this will actually, this content on this page, right? So here's my favorite, some favorites, welcome Jim, it says welcome Jim, and some content will change based on user preferences, based on things you got settings, right? Different things there, different options there. I can't even go down here. Different things here, right? You change this to a different edition, different language, so forth, right? So there's dynamic capabilities here, right? So I consider this being a dynamic website, right? Now, another option from my perspective is, first there's static, then there's like dynamic websites. Then I would call basically a full-blown web app, right? So I consider Google Maps, right? So, you're not to say you're not getting information, maybe directions, but, that's very dynamic, right? That's, I consider that a full-blown web application, but technically even a static website, I guess, is really kind of considered a web app. But from my perspective, I kind of separate that out in my mind. I consider like I said, Google Maps, like say Gmail, Discord in the browser. I don't really, I look at those as really being full-blown web apps, right? So that's just my perspective on that. So let's go back to the presentation here. So here's an example how web server process a dynamic web page, right? So you got your browser, you make your HTTP request to the web server, right? Then the web server, so in the case of our ESPN page, web server is going to say, it's going to send a request to the application server saying, hey, do you know who this user is, right? And it says, then it's going to go to the database server to get my preferences, my favorites, to return this back to the application server. This application server is going to dynamically create this new content based on the information, return this back to the web server, and this web server is going to return this back to the client. Okay. Now I do want to go through this web server, application server, and database server a little bit. Okay. So for the most part, this shows kind of like a tower-like computer, right? So, and a web server could be a tower-type computer. Same thing here, tower computer for application server, database server. They make servers like this, right? And their main purpose is to, they're not for personal use, right? They have a special use, right? A special use to be either an application server, application server, a web server, or a database server, right? But what's the difference between this web server here and this? This is hardware, right? This is a box, right? So what would be the difference here between a web server and application server? Maybe it does look different, but it could look the same here. But what you might want to do is there's certain things that you would want configured for a web server from a hardware perspective, right? You may want it, so maybe you don't need a lot of memory here, right? You don't need a big hard drive or anything like that. You don't have, and you're not processing anything. In this case, you're just kind of passing. This is just a pass through almost. The web server gets this request, says, hey, I need to forward this onto the application server. The application server sends it gets information from the database server, takes that information from database, recreates the web page, passes it back to the web server. So this is kind of a go-between, right? So the hardware configuration on this web server may be different. It should be, really. Should be different than what's on this application server. This application server is doing a lot of processing, maybe not a lot of RAM, and you would have a different configuration here, a different hardware configuration. Same thing with a database server. You may here, when you're storing data, you need a lot of space, right? RAM's about random access memory. That's about reading stuff into temporary memory, right? That's what RAM is, random access memory, right? For a database server, you're going to have disk space. You're going to be saving data. So you need a lot of disk space, right? For storage, right? Storage space. So your configuration be a little different here, right? But what also makes this different is there's web server software on here. There's software that makes this a web server. There's application server software that makes this an application server, and the same thing with database, right? So actually the software is also installed on here. And so let's just take a look at a few things on that. And also here's an example of, like I said, this shows an example of a kind of a tower for, a web server, application server, etc. And here's actually that DNS I was talking about earlier. It basically takes the name of the URL name, and then it's going to take that, and then that's going to be not converted, but that's going to be changed into the IP address because it knows the IP address. It's a lookup. DNS does a lookup, says what's the IP address of this number. It has it, then it returns it to this web server. Okay. But sorry, I regressed there. So basically, here's a tower. This is what a web server could look like, application server, database server. But they all could look differently than that, right? So here's some kind of, this is just kind of a quick little thing I searched for. I was kind of looking at more of a, well, here's another, here's a kind of a tower, but them are servers. Just kind of see what they kind of look like. And typically they could actually look exactly like a regular tower computer. They could look a little differently, right? And they also could be rack computers, right? And if you got like a big data center, see like this here, this thing's a rack. These could be this web server. Okay, this is a pictures of all these are different web servers, and that's what they're doing. They're basically taking that HTTP request, and possibly calling an application server, and then bringing that data back to the client, right? Sending the data back to the client, right? So most of the time when we talk about these servers aren't going to have their own monitors most of the time. Usually a monitor, usually you can access a web server, from a different computer, right? So if I had some web servers set up, if I had a few different web servers set up, you could access them from your computer just by knowing how to do that, right? And that's where you'd configure things and update things, etc., right? So just kind of wanted to mention that a little bit. Hope that makes a little bit of sense. You don't need to know that necessary for the test, right? All of this. They just got to know what a web server is, what an application server is, what a database server is. And, application server has to do with dynamic content, right? What else do I kind of want to show here? I hate how that does that. Okay. So here's basically, here's application server hardware. So there's a ton of them. Years ago there was a lot less to choose from, made things simpler. But here's, IBM has a WebSphere. This is, and these have licenses and cost a lot of money. If you want to use the WebSphere in a production environment, you're going to spend some money. And so, companies do. It's professionally built software, application software for individual people, for small groups, small companies. There's cheaper, different options, right? A lot of times when companies have software like this or use this software, really it's because they want to support, because they have a whole support team, and they have a whole support team to help out, right? The IBM would have a IBM WebSphere support team would help out if there's any need for help, right? And a lot of times when we're talking about it, sometimes these are used for systems that are, handling multiple transactions, maybe, thousands of transactions a second and stuff like that, right? So you need some hot, heavy duty stuff, right? But, for stuff like, basic stuff, Apache Tomcat, this is really for more for Java and stuff like that. But Apache Tomcat, Oracle WebLogic, that's another one similar to IBM. Like I said, this is application server software. This is what gets installed on that hardware, making it really an application server. Okay. What else did I really want to show you? Here's some web servers. So here's some software for web servers. And sometimes there's something redundant, because nowadays there's actually products that do both. Like Apache Tomcat could be both an application server and a web server. And sometimes you might even have that on the same hardware computer, right? On the same hardware server. You might have both of those. It all depends. The reasons not to do that sometimes, the reasons for keeping it separate is, there's multiple reasons. One, kind of maybe for security reasons, right? If somebody gets access to one of your servers, all right, if you have things on different servers, then they only have access to one, as opposed to if you have everything on one server, they have access to everything, right? The other is usually about like performance and stuff like that. So, if you have something that grows, so you have a website, web application that grows, it's nice to have it spread out on multiple for performance reasons. And then also, if something goes wrong, sometimes computers fail, right? Ashton was talking about he was having problems with his personal computer. I mean, servers fail too. Servers have problems, right? So if you have everything on one, it's easier to have redundant systems where you have multiple web servers, multiple application servers. So if one goes out, you just keep on you can keep on running, right? It'll just skip that one. So and it's good to have things separate like that too, right? But like here's some of the different web servers that are available. Probably the two biggest ones here is Nginx. This one's a really big, popular one. Apache used to be, the biggest for years and years, like 70, 80%. But Nginx, I think they're actually bigger now than Apache. So the percentage that Apache, the percentage of web servers that are using Apache software as opposed to Nginx, and a lot of these other ones are a lot less. Okay, so that's that. So back to our thing here. So that once again, the web server handles requests from clients, such as web browsers, and responds with the appropriate content. Web servers primarily use HTTP, but also support FTP. FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol. Okay, and SMTP is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. That's for mail, right? So that's for files. That's for mail. And that's for HTTP documents, which is basically HTML, right? They deliver static content like HTML pages, images, videos, and files. Application server. So the application server works between the web server and the database server, managing and processing the data. The application servers deliver more complex content from databases, services, and enterprise systems, right? So here we're just showing an application server connects to a database server, but it can connect to other services as well, right? External from this is looking at this being your own system, right? Whereas an application server may go and call APIs, may call to get data in different ways to bring back and process it and pass it on. Okay. So a database server, a computer system that provides database services to other computer programs or computers. It stores and retrieves data as requested by other software applications. Database servers handle database queries and run on, here's some examples, MySQL, Postgres, SQL, Maria, Mongo. MongoDB is one we'll be using. Especially, it'll be in the second year. We use MongoDB. We already used SQL Server in the C# course. The people that are in this course that already took C#. So, primarily that's it in this program. Usually it's MongoDB or SQL Server, but there's others as well, obviously. Let's see. Yeah, this is just showing a dynamic web page. What was this? This was a static. It's a dynamic. Okay. Sorry. So, yeah, so here, yeah, we already looked at dynamic. We looked at the ESPN one. I considered a dynamic web page. So how does JavaScript fit into this architecture, right? So I do want to point out this first statement, even though this is primarily true, it's not as true as it used to be because JavaScript is now used on the server side as well. But in the early days, or all the way up until recent times, JavaScript, and it still is it's primarily still a client-side scripting language that is run by this JavaScript engine in the web browser. Okay. So every web browser has its own JavaScript engine. And when we get to the JavaScript, I'll show you, we'll discuss the different JavaScript engines and kind of talk a little bit how that works within, the different browsers, right? When the browser requests an HTML page that contains JavaScript or a link to a JavaScript file, and you'll see, we'll be seeing that here real soon on how we actually have JavaScript either embedded within our HTML file, or we have a link to a separate JavaScript file. But both when the browser requests the HTML page that has that link or has that embedded, both the HTML and JavaScript are loaded into the browser, right? So basically, all of that is handled on the client side. And the term you use really for HTML is the browser renders the HTML renders. It basically takes that code, the HTML code, and renders that, and then you have the visual representation of that code is what you see on your screen, right? That's what you see in your browser. But the JavaScript is also considered basically static. It's static. Even though you could use JavaScript on your pages, they might have little dynamic controls, animations, different things. All that happens within that browser on that client side. That's basically static content that's on that web server that just gets pushed down to the client, right? Gets returned to the client. Because JavaScript runs on the client, not the server, it provides functions that don't require a trip back to the server. This can help an application run more efficiently. So basically, when we start creating JavaScript, we'll create functions and everything else. All of that's executed right there in the browser, right? And like I said, it talks about the client side, and most JavaScript is client side. But within recent times, there's been more than one framework, but probably the most popular one is Node.js. And we will, towards the end of this class, you get a little bit of introduction into Node, but in the second year course, we'll be using a lot of Node. And Node, Node can be run on the web server, and so it is can be server side. So JavaScript can be server side in that case. Okay. So some common uses of JavaScript. So data validation. So basically, let's say you have a form and you put in an email address. You didn't put no @ sign. You could have JavaScript that runs in the web browser that when you hit the, maybe either leaving that field or when you hit the submit button, it's going to validate and say, hey, this is not a valid email address. Please correct, or whatever, right? So that'd be like data validation, right? Or entering numbers when only letters are allowed, etc. Image swaps and rollovers, so that when you actually hover over something, it changes, right, from one image to another. Carousels, right? Them are and accordions. This is kind of like little dynamic controls. That's why the word dynamic kind of can be used in different ways. We talked about dynamic websites, but JavaScript has these little dynamic capabilities, but from a perspective of it's static from the purpose of a request response, right? JavaScript is static content, but then when it's in the browser, it might do some different animations and from that perspective, it's kind of dynamic, right? A carousel is right; it just like goes through different images, right? Accordions, when you can take something, expand a section of your page, might have a heading, and you click on the heading, expands, right? Or you can minimize it. Slideshows is another. So hypertext markup language, HTML, is used to define the content and structure of the web page. This document starts with a document type declaration that is followed by tags that identify the HTML elements within the document. Okay. So always think of, when you hear HTML, think of content and structure. Okay. CSS, which is cascading style sheets, is used to format the contents of the web page. All right. Basically, you're making it pretty. It's making it more aesthetically pleasing, so to speak. Right. To do that, you can apply CSS style sheets to an HTML document by a link element in the head section. Yeah. So you basically create CSS in a separate file, and then you link to it within your HTML, right? You can actually include it in there, and we'll talk about that later on when we get, future chapters, when why, advantages and disadvantages of why you should or shouldn't do that, okay? But generally, you create CSS in a separate file, you link to that, and those styles will be applied to that HTML in that page. So here's a code of a basic HTML file. So this doc type HTML, and we're going to go through all this. We'll go through this tomorrow. The doc type HTML, this basically says, this tells the browser, hey, this is HTML5. I know it doesn't have a number HTML5 or anything like that, but this is the doc type that you use to state that the version of HTML you're using is HTML5. So this tells the browser. And we're not going to go through each of these. We'll go through this tomorrow. I will mention this one though too. So we were talking about, we'll be talking here in the upcoming slides about accessibility. And accessibility is more like, maybe people or someone's visually impaired or have some other impairment, hearing impaired, visually impaired, whatever. So a lot of times they have what's called these screen readers, right? And these screen readers will read the screen, and maybe if someone's visually impaired, these screen readers will actually read the contents of your document, right? They read the contents of this HTML document and read that back to the user. So that's where this language is English here, and these are used a lot by these screen readers that's their primary purpose is to use this for figuring out what language, right? And like I said, we'll go through all this other tomorrow. This is just, showing you a basic HTML file. Starts with a declaration. It's going to start with an HTML tag and end with an HTML tag, okay? Here's an example of a CSS file, and this is how you structure that. And this is basically saying the HTML element body, the HTML element H1 tag, and we're going to go through all these tags. IMG is an image tag, and this is a paragraph tag for P. And this is basically saying for the body tag of the document, we want this style, right? For this H1 tag, which is a heading tag, heading 1 means the biggest one. It's 1 through 6. Heading 1's the biggest. Heading 6 is the smallest. For this H1 tag, it's saying, we want this style. This is For the image tag, we want this style. And then paragraph tag, we want this style. Okay. So just kind of want to mention this as part of the slides here, but this is an FTP client, and this is in the early days of really like updating websites and stuff like that. What you would do is, whoever's the administrator on the website, or if it's your own website and you have something deployed on a web server somewhere, you could use what's called an FTP client to update your content. And basically, you would have like here on the left side, you have your local file. On the right side is the remote file, which would be like the web server, right? And then you'd connect, so it would connect to the web server. And then basically, after you made your changes, you would make your change to your local file, and then you would take and you would upload this, and you would upload it from your local to the web server, and that's how you would upload things, right? And that's and I'm not saying that people don't typically do that. That's not really the best way anymore. There's other options. This is more of a older, archaic way, obviously, actually of uploading files from a local server to a web server. But FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol, and it is a way to upload your files. Here's the components of an HTTP URL. And so the very first is the protocol. And in the case of web, the protocol is HTTP. The second part, you have your colon, 2 forward slashes, your domain name. And this is showing the Muroc. This is the book publisher, right? And it's showing www.muroc.com. That's your domain name. Then it has a path, right? And then your file name. Not everything, every request is always like this. Okay, it all depends on how things are configured, right? On the web server. All depends on, you have something at your root directory, you may not have this path, and you just have a file name at the end. But what it's just basically showing you is you have to have this. This has to be mapped to some HTML. This has to be mapped in HTTP. This has to be mapped, I should say this one here. This has to be mapped to an HTML file on the web server for it to bring that back, right? So what happens if you omit parts of it? If you omit the protocol, the default of HTTP will be used. Yeah. In the early days of the internet, you had to have things perfect. If you didn't have HTTP there, nowadays you don't even have to put in www. You just put in ESPN.com and you're off and running, right? If you omit the file name, the default document name for the web server will be used. Yeah. So basically they're saying, yeah. So basically if you only included the domain name, like I said, www.espn.com, it's going to return the home page or the index page to find how that's configured in the web server. And that's something you would decide as a programmer, as a company, whatever. What's our default page, right? But here, let's get too far ahead here. But just remember, first part's a protocol, then your domain name, path, and then file name. How to access a web page on your own server or computer using features of your text ID. Find the file in File Explorer, then double click on it. Yeah. So yeah, if you create an HTML page, I'm not really going to do it, but basically you create an HTML page on your, and you save it with the right extension .html. So you go back to that folder, you double click on it, that's going to bring up that web page, right? It's going to bring up that web page. That's just for locally, right? Double click on it, open default, or right click it and use the open with command to select the browser. So let's say here. I want to see what this says. Yeah. So, and one thing I know, there's a question on the test, and so I might as well, even though we're going to go through that test and everything. There is a question on the test. So browsers have changed over, browsers change. They change actually quite often. But there used to be, like up here in the left-hand side, there used to be like a file directory. And then after a while, they moved it under the 3 dots over here on the right-hand side, where you choose this and go to more tools. And you could do a file. There'd be like file or stuff. They don't have that anymore, right? Right? So if you're in a browser and you want to open up a file that's on your local machine, you can hit Control O. And Control O will open up, and then you can actually go and navigate to where that file is, click it and hit open, and it'll open it, okay? Obviously, we'll open other things sometimes within the browser itself, but basically, we're just talking about it from an HTML perspective. Once you have an HTML page created, and like I said, you can just hit the the bottom key on the left of your keyboard, the CTRL Control, and then the letter O, and that will open up that window that you can select it to open it up. It used to be file, so I just wanted to kind of mention that, and the test asks you how to open it up, and you can't do it how it says on the test anymore. All right. access a web page on your web server. All right. So basically, here, what was this? I'm sorry, I'm kind of doing how to view CSS. Click on the link that refers to the CSS. Look in the head element of the file. Okay. I'm going to talk about the 4 issues of for web developers. And I wouldn't actually even call the first one a web issue. It's really a functionality opportunity. Responsive web design, cross-browser compatibility, web accessibility, search engine optimization. Okay. So the issue with that. So responsive web design means that a website should adapt to the screen size of the device that's accessing it, whether it's a desktop, computer, tablet, or mobile phone. Okay. Now it's a lot easier nowadays with frameworks and how these languages have evolved. That it's a lot easier, and even within the browser itself, it's a lot easier to handle different screens for different clients. Okay. Used to have to do everything, write one thing for mobile, one thing for a desktop, etc. Right, and now it's much easier to handle responsive web design. Typically, the overall look and feel of a website will be consistent from one screen size to the next. If I showed you, let me show you this. So, actually, here, let's go to more tools. Developer tools. We're going to be looking into this a lot more in the future. And I haven't gone to this in a while, I guess, because I've already forgotten. There's too many options. Actually, we just talk about that later. I don't want to waste any time on that. Though we are here, one thing I do want to show you while we're here is, we'll go back to developer tools. So we do more tools here and do developer tools. Elements, if you go to elements, this is the HTML document. So that's the HTML document of that page, okay? This is one way to view the HTML of that page, okay? That's it. So this is what I had to click. So right here is over here all the way on the right hand side. It's actually taken the dimensions. It's changed this dimensions, right? So a responsive web will change and be readable and usable, right? And it depends on how you program things, right? But you want it to be able, as you see, we're changing the dimensions responsive up there at the top. Right up here, we're changing that by dragging this, and we want this to be readable and usable, right? And this all has to do with the responsive web. Also, there's lots of different options here. iPhone, and plus even the different kinds of iPhone 12, and you don't have to worry about this right now. But this is basically being able to test the responsiveness of a web page. You got all these different options. This is great. Not that many years ago, this wasn't even around, right? This is newer. This is newer stuff. So this is great. Yeah, I forgot how to get to that. So there we go. You can toggle that now. But that's one way to view the source. The other way, let's close this up. So the other way is you just right click in here and click view page source. And here's the page source of that page. right? Let's see what we have, And don't worry about this right now, right? We're just getting started, We're going to go through all this stuff. Yeah, and I know, especially looking at these more complex stuff, there's so much stuff there. So here's it was talking about clicking on a style sheet. Boom. So I clicked on that style sheet. I have to change this because I have a little toolbar up here that you guys don't see, but it gets in my way. So just by clicking on that style sheet, right, I'm going to click on it again, it'll open that up. So this is like it has multiple style sheets. So like we were looking at in our example, we had that body, right? But this is using other things too, right? So this is the style. This is one of the style sheets for that page. So that's one way to open that up. All right, let's close that. Let's get out of here. So responsive web design, we kind of looked at that. It's a great tool that they have nowadays there in the browsers, especially Chrome. Has all those different, especially it has all those different devices as well. You can sit there and look at what it's going to look like in a different device. Before you used to have these, companies would have all these different devices to bring up the web pages on to see what they look like in those devices. Well, here you can just sit there and do it right in the browser there. Very, very convenient. Just showing you here. Here's an example of Land's End where you've got a desktop browser view, and then here you've got the mobile. Okay. For the statistics to prove you need responsive web design. Okay. So in a global survey, 87% of users, 90% used mobile phones to access the internet. 93% use desktops. Okay. So just basically a lot of people are using, mobile phones, right? So obviously people that are using mobile phones, a lot of people are still using, desktop laptops as well, but more people use mobile phones than anything. 57% of all web traffic comes from mobile devices. %50 of all web shoppers in the United States buy from mobile devices. 40% of mobile users will go to a different site if the first one isn't mobile friendly. Yeah. Don't we all do that? If things don't look right and it's slow or it doesn't look good, kind of move on to the next one. Okay. Guidelines for cross-browser compatibility. So as far as cross-browser compatibility, this used to actually be a big problem some years ago where you had, because the different browsers, basically what's changed is the standards, the HTML, the JavaScript, all these standards became there used to be different governing bodies. They've kind of come together and worked together to unify and to kind of make sure there's consistency. And the same thing with the browsers as well, so that the browsers support most of the features that are available in the specifications. So years ago, when you built something, nowadays there's Microsoft Edge, used to be called, before Microsoft Edge was Internet Explorer. So Internet Explorer was very popular for the longest time, and especially on in the corporate world, because they all used they all used Windows machines, and in Windows machines, as soon as you started the computer, it would have Internet Explorer by default on it. So people kind of by default always use Internet Explorer. Chrome kind of came along and really kind of started changing some things and became much more popular within time. Okay, but back in the day, you used to have to build things for other browsers. There's also they have Firefox listed. Firefox used to be the best for supporting standards years ago, whereas the other ones were a little farther behind. And you kind of what we used to do is we used to build for Firefox. We used to use Firefox as our browser, and then we would look what wasn't working in the other browsers, and we'd have to do certain things in our codes. If it's this browser, do this. If it's that browser, do that. It was a pain. Nowadays, nowadays, cross browser is not a problem anymore for the most part. Okay, not saying there's not minor little problems, but it's not like it used to be years ago. You don't have to really do a lot of that. If it's this browser, do this. If it's that browser, do that. Right. So web accessibility. So there's different web accessibility laws. You have the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. There's also some federal sections 504, 508. These are all federal. These are all different accessibility laws that are been created. Okay, and this is basically saying that and it all depends on there's certain requirements. I'd have to actually review because I don't remember. I remember I do it last time I taught this, but I need to go look. There's certain rules for people who have to. So just build your own site. You don't have to adhere to these. But if you create a public facing, especially if you create, if you're going to be doing work with the government and you're creating work for the government, oh yeah, you need to make sure that you're handling all this kind of stuff. All these you have to adhere to all these accessibility laws. If you're just a small little organization, not so much. But they've been they're very accommodating. They've been accommodating this for a while. They just want companies to work and work in the direction of making things more web accessibility than telling shutting down sites or something like that, right? But there are these laws. Types of disabilities: visual, hearing, motor, cognitive. And like I just mentioned a little bit earlier, we were talking about that HTML page that had the English, EN for English. Well, that's basically a web scraper is going to read that, and that's to help for someone who's visually impaired or otherwise, or other ones as well, right? This is called the Web AIM website. And it just discusses web accessibility and everything like that. And you can go out and check that out. I think that's about it on there. So does anybody have any questions about anything?